I think, my personal opinion is that your mentor should not be your supervisor. I think that there are conversations that you have with your mentor about risks that you want to take, or issues that might be going on in the workplace that might not be appropriate at that moment in time to be having that conversation with your supervisor. So I'm a real proponent of, I mean, I think a supervisor can help to link you with the mentor and make those connections, and is your greatest advocate. But I think that a mentoring relationship, in my mind, is a bit of a different relationship that should be outside of that supervisory.
Yeah, I agree.
Supervisory relationship.
Oftentimes, you want to talk to your mentor about your supervisor.
Right. That's right.
But I think, in an academic setting, a lot of students have faculty who are mentors.
Right.
But that's a different. It's not a work relationship. I mean, it's work, but it's not a. But I think you're right. I think in a work environment, a mentor should be someone who may be more advanced or more expert, or able to really show you the ropes, having been in your shoes. And your supervisor could be more of a coach. I see myself as a coach in a lot of ways. I don't play a lot of sports, so I don't really know how coaches do it, but they seem to have a playbook, and they seem to be able to motivate the entire team regardless of what they have to play the game. And I think that's a lot different from mentoring, which is more connecting on an expert to tutor kind of relationship.
I agree, and I'm thinking of some folks that I've worked with over time. I've been happily engaged in public health leadership activities for a long time, but recently, the last decade, with public health leadership institutes. And sometimes the folks who are in those institutes, the scholars, will reach out to me after the formal institute has ended, after that year is over. And sometimes, with agreement on both sides, we engage in what sometimes those folks will call coaching. But I think of it as mentoring. And I think the value is what has been said, and the piece that I want to reinforce is that because I am not in the organization where the individual is, because I have a different perspective, even though I love public health and know some about maternal child health, I can speak with folks from lots of different viewpoints, but not get into their particular immediate skill sets, where the supervisor, the CEO, the COO might be working with somebody in a small organization or a mid-level manager in a large. But when I spend an intense period of time, and this is a free, gratis kind of an arrangement where colleagues have come together, and I learn, so hopefully some growth for me too, and the other person who has asked for the mentoring, we work together, we come together on identified what I call big picture issues, and sometimes those issues mean that a person may move on, may mean a person stays, but the value of the discussion is someone outside the organization with someone within another organization who has some familiarity with what the person may be experiencing, but it's not the same as the coaching with the skill set that is a supervisory, as Mike said, responsibility. I see them both as very valuable tools for people development.
Some definition of mentors at one point was a mentor is a wise friend. And so I guess that's sort of how I approach it. I mean, I hadn't really put those words, so they hadn't come to the fore recently. But I think if I use that sort of framework, which I think I do not consciously, I think, your supervisor can be a wise friend, but that also, for certain things, perhaps, sometimes, in some situations. But, I'm also a person, and I guess this also leads me to say is that I think one should have many mentors. I've had mentee, and simultaneously, you don't just sort of one person who, mentor. At least that's not how it's evolved for me. I think maybe there are formal structures that help to get people going that way when they're young in their profession. But over time, I've developed many, and I think I've, hopefully I'm a wise friend to all sorts of people, and I certainly have my wise friends, and on many occasions it's been my boss. You know?
Mm.
That doesn't mean to say that I might not have things I need to discuss with a wise friend about my boss.
Right.
Right.
But, you know, I think as you network, and if that's part of your own
Mhm.
personal development, you really are a conscious networker,
Mhm.
and your mentors help you do that and make
Right.
those good networks and so forth, that, you know,
Mhm.
I think this may be why I have a little bit faster, looser concept of mentoring than the books do. And the coaching, it's funny, when you were talking, Mike, I kind of think of it as a modeling and sort of the coach, well, you know, the coach runs out there in the football field, I think, because I don't play football either. I think when I see TV is the coach runs out, you know, and sort of shows the guys how to do the run, how to do the pass or whatever, you know, and then they might do it with the person, you know, and then they stand on the sidelines and the person does it and they comment and critique, you know, and they step back and back and back to
Mhm.
the point where, you know, unfortunately they scream at the people the whole game, but,
Right.
you know, but you know,
So maybe not the best
maybe
analogy
not
for
the
people
right-
development.
not too far. But anyway, you know, in some ways that's, so there's different ways I think we can think about some of these concepts and make them work for
Mhm.
us as supervisors or teachers or just colleagues.
But I
you
think
know, not to be honed in by definitional structure.
Right. The interesting thing is, though, we're all saying that mentoring and that coaching is requisite to
Mhm.
develop your organization. And it's funny
Absolutely.
because that's not really a formal part of any organization, for most organizations. That's always seen as an extra
Mhm.
versus something that organizations should do. And yet it's so essential in our experiences
Yeah.
to who we became
Yeah.
and are becoming. And so I'd like to see organizations get more serious about ways to develop people through mentoring and training supervisors as coaches and thinking through what that could look like in a more systematic way.
Right.
And I don't think we spend enough time on that.
I agree with you. We struggle with that issue when we were developing the MCH leadership competencies and really looking at the literature and what was going to be included and what was not. And one that ended up in, but after much conversation, was around mentoring and teaching. And there were two very distinct camps about whether this was something that belonged in the competencies. Folks who were already teaching felt passionately that this, of course, needed to be in.
Right.
And practitioners had a different feel about it. So I agree with you. I think that tension really exists in the field. Even if we're practicing it, it might not be something that we continue to value and put a high value and say this is something we need to really invest in.
Right.
In teaching people how to be a mentor, in teaching people how to be a protege. What are the expectations? There are things you can learn. It's not just you're a good supervisor, so guess
Right,
what? Now
go.
you get to be a good mentor
Right,
too.
right.
You know.
And giving people the time to do it.
Right.
I mean, it takes time.
Does.
And yet,
It's an investment.
no one, you know, that
Yes.
work is extra in a lot of places.
Right.
And I think that's too bad.
I agree.
Mhm.